tell your life story.
Just
Start with the train ride from Harlem to Salt Lake, Mother.
Oh. I can remember. I was 1 day old. I was born in Salt Lake. And Aunt Jenny was going to go down and get this baby. And they had already had one boy that they had adopted. He was 3 years old at the time. And so when they said that they had a baby for him, they talked to Mother and Dad and said, there's a baby down there. If you want her, you can have her, but if you don't, we'll take her. Mother and Dad said, you bet, we'd like her. So Mother and Dad and Aunt Jenny drove down on the train to Salt Lake that morning and brought me home with them. Aunt Jenny held me all the way home, and the minute she handed me to Mother, I started to cry. Aunt Jenny got off at Hiram, and then Mother and Dad brought me over to Logan.
Yay, that's good, that was good. How'd you meet Bob? Oh, okay, sorry, I'm moving things along here.
Yeah, let's move things along. I do remember what happened when I was 3 years old. I went in to get my tonsils out. Dr. Roy Hansen was the one that was going to get my tonsil or take my tonsils out. We just went to his office. And I remember going in there and I was so excited, jumping up and down on the bed there and just couldn't wait to go get my tonsils out. When they took me in the room and started giving me the ether, I hollered and screamed, I don't like Dr. Roy, I don't like Dr. Roy. It's your turn.
My turn. Yeah. Only thing I can remember is Easter time, the time for eggs. The time for eggs is Easter time. Well, I was born down in Grandma Anderson's house on the corner of First West and First North in Logan. The doctor come in the middle of the night. T.B. Budge was the family doctor, come to the house and delivered me and left again. And when my grandmother got up in the morning, found out that Mother had a new baby and that she'd slept all through the whole thing, she was pretty mad. So she wasn't going to like me at all, but I turned out to be her favorite. The reason she liked me is because I could run so fast. She'd send me to the Royal Bakery to get rolls, and I'd always take a shortcut. I'd run up 2nd North and in the back door of the courthouse, up the steps and down out the front. And that was my shortcut.
Luke!
How much did you weigh?
Well, I don't know how they weighed me, but they claim I weighed 13 pounds when I was born. But I can remember a lot of things at Grandma's. We lived there until I was 3 years old, but I can remember sleeping in the baby buggy. And I can remember sleeping upstairs with my older brothers. I didn't like that very well. There was no lights upstairs at all. So we'd take a candle and go up to bed, and then the candle would go out. It was pretty dark. I didn't like that. But we had a lot of fun there at Grandma's house. Her yard took in a quarter of a block west and a half a block north, so it was a big lot. And she had lots of apple trees, a great big garden that we used to plant every year. Chickens, she had chicken coop. In fact, we liked to go down and gather the eggs. That was fun. Unless there was a setting hen that wouldn't let you you reach under to get the eggs, and she'd get pretty mad and peck you. But it was a different life than what we have now. The bathroom was 50 yards down the trail, but it was a deluxe. It was a two-holer,
And a good magazine to read while you
Yeah.
waited.
Yeah, when they'd send for the Montgomery Ward magazine, they'd say, please send your latest magazine, but leave out the slick sheets.
I remember when I was little, and Dad, they had chickens, but they had one rooster that would just chase me and knock me down and sit on my shoulders and peck at my head. So I never liked chickens, ever. And I'm sure it was because of that big old rooster.
Or any bird, for that matter.
Yeah, any bird. I don't
Tell us-
like any birds that
Okay, what
fly
else?
at me.
Let's
If they
run
don't fly at me, I think it's nice, but when they fly at me, they've lost my...
They seem to know she's scared of them because they like to dart at her.
What else?
Well, they had all the conveniences at home, though. We had a big pit on the front lawn, a rock pit, where they put the big tub and make the homemade soap. They always used to make their own laundry soap. And then when they wasn't making soap, they used that tub on Saturday night in the middle of the kitchen floor. That's where we took our bath. And me being the youngest, I was the last one. So you can imagine what the water looked like by the time I got in. But my father was a night watchman down at Borden Milk Factory, and they had a big shower down there. And we liked to go down there at night after we'd deliver the milk around town. We always had customers that we took milk to. In fact, delivered to their door in the glass bottle was 5 cents a quart. You get 20 quarts for $1. Every night, though, we'd run around town and deliver the milk.
Yeah, and that was delivered to their door.
And how
Yeah.
did you deliver it?
Well, Dad would take us in the car. Then we'd just run in and put the bottle of milk by their door and pick up the empty bottle. But what I was going to tell you, we'd go in the shower room. Mother'd undress us and throw us in the shower, and Dad was in there, and he'd soap us all off and get us cleaned up. And then when one would come out, then the next one would go. It was kind of a production line. So with 6 boys, it was day's work to get us all cleaned up.
Do you ever run out of hot water?
Not down there. There was no hot water tank, so at home there was the tea kettle on the stove and a reservoir on the side of the stove. And the water had to come in from outside the hydrant. You'd pack the water in. The drinking water was sitting on what we call the wash stand. It had a wash bowl on it and a bucket of water and then a dipper hanging on the wall. And you could take the dipper down, get a drink and hang it back up.
For the next guy.
Yeah. It was a lot closer family than what we have now. If somebody drinks out of your glass, then you're done now. We did have a telephone, though. Dad, being in the painting business, had to have a telephone for his business, so we were one of the few families that had a telephone. After we moved up on First East, boy, I'd run half a block every direction to call somebody to the phone. Somebody'd call and say, "We'd like to speak to the Fonsbecks. Could you please call them to the phone?" So away we'd go, call them over the telephone. Nowadays, you can't get away from the phone. It's in your pocket. So it was a whole different world.
Did you have a TV?
A TV? We didn't even have a radio. That was before radios. We had the Victrola. You'd wind it up, put the record on, and it was like Sister Hinckley said she started hearing what was it?
Tiptoe through the
Tiptoe
tulips.
through the tulips.
Tell us about your allergies when you were little, Mother, when you were a baby to milk.
Oh, when I was 3 months old, I didn't eat. I was allergic to everything, and I couldn't eat. And everything I ate, I give it back to her. And so when I was 3 months old, let's see, from January to May, maybe 5 months old, my cousin was born, and she
In
weighed
Hiram.
exactly the same as I did, 8 pounds, and I hadn't gained anything. I was still weighing 8 pounds at 3 months old. And so the doctor said, if you could just get this baby mother's milk, just one feeding a day of mother's milk, she'd snap right out of it, I'm sure. And my aunt had had a baby that was just a month older than I was, and so she lived in Hiram. That was Aunt Hattie, and Asel was the cousin. And so she said, you bet, I've got plenty of milk and I'll feed her once a day if you can get her here. So Mother and I went over and lived with Aunt Jenny. She just lived a couple of blocks from Aunt Hattie. She just lived down the hill, and Aunt Hattie lived up the hill. Once a day, Mother would carry me up to Aunt Hattie's, and she would feed me once a day for a month. And all of a sudden, I started to grow. Everything was fine, and I've been growing ever since.
You didn't get very far though, did you?
Far enough. And then we moved back to Logan. We lived on down on down by the park in Logan. We lived just on the corner of the park, across the street a little bit.
The
And-
fairgrounds.
Merlin Oaks Park.
And Dad ran a little grocery store that was right there on the corner. And that's where he worked. And then he went to school. And Mother worked, and so she had her cousin come from Colorado and lived with him, Aunt Ethelyn, and her cousin Ethelyn. And so she tended me while Mother would work. That was for 2 or 3 months that she tended me. And then they usually had a baby tender through. I had another girl that tended me in the daytime, and her name was Catherine. And I can't remember. When she got married, her name was Catherine Buck, but I don't remember what her maiden name was. But I remember her from when I was just little, but I haven't seen her or heard anything of her since I grew up. Then we moved when I was 2 years old, then we moved out to Nibley. So I'm one of the earliest settlers there of the people that are still left. I think Eldon and Lowell have lived there longer than I have, and that's about all.
Tell us what it was like growing up as an only child.
Not very fun. I did have a lot of friends and I had a lot of cousins, but at night when they'd go home, then I had to go upstairs to bed all alone, and I didn't like that. I always slept upstairs, but I was lonely, and Mother and Dad were there. Mother was always there. Dad was usually to a meeting, but they slept downstairs and I'd go upstairs. There was a curtain. We only used the one room upstairs. There were 3 rooms, and I slept in the one on the east that has by the deck. So I had a big door, and I used to open that door. I remember one time I didn't make my bed very good. I was the only one up there ever, so I'd just get up and throw the bed up and then go down and go about my business, and didn't go back up until I went to bed that night. One night I went back up there, got in bed with a bumblebee. And it stung me, and I had curlers in my hair. I was all ready for Sunday school. I we're getting ready, and had curlers in my hair. And that bee stung me, and I turned into hives all over my body. Mother had to take my curlers out so that it could, I don't know why, but anyway, my head hurt, I guess, so she took the curlers out. But that's the only time I come and got in bed without making it, or without at least looking under the covers whether there was company under there or not.
So did you vow anything about being an only child? Is that why you have?
Well, I thought I would never like to have that for one of my kids, and so when I got started, I didn't know how to quit. We decided when we were married that we would have 12 children. we thought that would be
Well, they're
great.
cheaper by the dozen. We always like
We
the
always
bargain.
heard that. So when we got to 10, we decided to count me and Bob. And that made 11 and 12.
Well, that's
But we were excited. Every time we had a baby, then we were excited when the next one come along. And when the next one come along, then Bob took care of the older one, because I was taking care of the new baby and had to fuss a lot more with them. So he took over the older baby, and it helped a lot. He's always been a good help. I'm sure I would never have had that many children. I don't think I would have, except that he was such a good help that it was easy. And then the kids, as they grew up, they helped. So it was just, I just thought it was a great
Well, I
growing up.
think the main thing, and they were all good babies, that we didn't have any cross babies. If we
That's
had them, I
right.
think we'd quit.
Tell us
Well, when I was 3 years old, my dad bought the house on First East where Albertson's store is. It's in the middle of the block between 4th and 5th North. And boy, that was something. We had inside bathroom, had electric lights, and it wasn't too many years till we got a radio. The radios were just starting to come out then. It was quite a deal. It was about this wide and about that high, and then there sat a speaker on top, big cone shape, and we could get KSL, which was Salt Lake City. We could get KNX,
KLO in Ogden.
KLO in Ogden, KNX.
I don't know where KNX was
That
from.
was
It was
Denver, I
Spanish.
think. And then KPO, San Francisco. There was only a few stations. But radio back then was quite the deal. They had shows of all kinds on. We'd lay on the floor in front of the radio and listen to the show. Every night they'd have Merton Marge, Amos and Andy.
In the daytime, they'd have Helen Trent and Arndale Sunday, and a lot of those that were serials. You'd hear them every day. They'd go from one day to the other with the,
Just a soap.
yeah, just a soap opera. You'd only get 15 minutes or 30 minutes a day, and then the next day it'd pick up where it left off. And
But you could miss a month and never lose track of what was going on.
Helen
Yeah.
Trent showed me that you could have what romance in your life even after 35.
So was your family fairly prosperous for that day?
Well, we were in the depths of the Depression.
At the bottom.
Oh, the bottom. The bottom.
Depression.
We always had something to eat. We had, we raised a big garden. We had 8 or 10 cows that we milked every day. And Dad raised a few crops. We always had wheat in the mill. He'd put the wheat in the mill and they would take out flour for it. We always had plenty to eat, but finding a nickel to go somewhere was something else, because there just wasn't any nickels around. We'd spend hours out on the highway on our bikes trying to find beer bottles. We'd collect empty beer bottles and aluminum cans, anything that we could sell to Harry Bonsick, the junk man, and get a little bit of money.
Only about 2 cents at the most.
But you could go to the Gem Theater for a nickel. It only cost a nickel to get in there. The others were high priced, they were a dime.
The Capitol was 35 cents.
Well, that was for adults.
You went there at the last resort.
Hey, we only talk about the Utah. theater.
Well, the Utah, you could go to the Utah, and we did plenty.
It was the
Roxy.
new one. It was the brand new one. That was the Roxy.
The Roxy.
That was the fancy one. That was.
What did kids do for entertainment?
Oh,
besides
boy.
movie?
We had neighborhood kids all around our neighborhood. There was the Fonsbecks across the street, the Millers across the street. Cartwrights had 2 boys. Herb Pack lived 2 doors north. And then the Nesson family on the corner had boys just about the same age as us. We'd spend the whole Well, in the summer, all the evenings playing different games. Run, sheepy, run, hide and seek, cops and robbers, kick the can, all kinds of games. But we used to make things. We'd take shingles and make arrows out of them. They were really streamlined, about that long, and they had a little niche in them. Then we'd get a bunch of elastics on a stick, and then we'd get out on the street, and we could shoot from our place clear over to the ninth floor of church. We'd just pull them back and let them go. And then we had Miller Auto Body across the street. The older boys used to go over there and get carbide crystals. They'd bury a can in the ground and put some water in it, and they'd put a few crystals of carbide in there, and then they'd stuff another can in on top of it that had a hole in the top. And then they'd lay on their stomach way back with a match on a stick and hold over the can. It's just like, that's the first rocket I ever saw. That was the bigger boys. We didn't dare fool with that kind of stuff. Bet you could buy firecrackers back then. Walter and I rode our tricycle clear to Providence to get firecrackers.
We used to do the same thing out home, and all the kids around would come to our place and play. I guess mainly because my mother was very protective of me, and I couldn't go a lot of places, and so the kids would all congregate at my house. So we all played the same kind of games, and it was fun. We had a good time. And on Sunday afternoons, we'd go over to church, and after church, we'd meet, and then we'd go to somebody's house and play games, football or something like that. Touch football. So we always had a good time, but we couldn't get into town very often. But my mother never let me go to the Saturday night dances. All my friends could go to the dansant, to the dances on Saturday night, but I never could go, because I just didn't do that. Nice girls didn't do that.
Grandma protected.
So how old were you when you went to a first dance?
Probably after I was married.
Yeah, I took her up to Preston to the dance after we were married. And we went up to the Persiana up to Preston.
That was once before we were married, then we went after, and I believe I went with you once.
No, I don't think we went
Oh,
to dance till
okay.
after we were married.
That's why they got married.
I danced with him, I had to get married.
Tell us about Christmas.
Well, Christmas was an exciting time. Grandpa always had chores to do. Milk the cows, and I didn't ever get up very early, but maybe about 7 o'clock or 7:30 or so, I'd get up, I'd wake up, but I always had to wait until Grandpa come in, or Dad come in to the house before I could open my presents. And then as I got a little older, then we waited for Aunt Jenny and Uncle John to come. So then after he'd opened the presents, then we just usually around there stay at home. But I remember Mother and Dad, they thought I got so many things for Christmas, and I guess I got plenty. I didn't get any more than any of the rest of them did, but they'd always tell me, Mother'd say, one year I got this vase, and I still have that vase. It's a little green vase, stands about that tall, and she said, that was my Christmas present one year. And Dad said, one year I got 6 little marbles, Aggie marbles, for Christmas, and that was my Christmas. My mother had sewn a little bag out of Levi's to put them in, and that was my Christmas present. But then I think they probably got the same as all the rest of the kids, and I guess that's what I got, the same as most of the rest of the kids.
Okay.
I remember one Christmas, though, when I was 5 years old, while we were waiting for Dad to come in, I was up, and Aunt Jenny and Uncle John were there, and Dad was still out milking, and we got a telephone call from Kingston telling us that my Grandma Snow had passed away. She had fell down the steps. They had the step, their basement steps was in a trap door. And someone had left the trap door up and she didn't know about it. And so she come walking along and fell down the trap door, fell into the basement. But she got better and went to they took her to the hospital, and that was about a week before, and she got better and was about ready to come home. And then this Christmas Eve, she said, I think I'd like to open my presents. She had presents from her kids that had given her things. And so they let her open her presents because they wasn't going to be there in the morning. And then in the morning when they went, she had died. And so that was an unhappy Christmas. And when Dad came in, then we had to tell him that his mother had died. So he and Mother got ready immediately and went down to Kingston. And I went home with Aunt Jenny and Uncle John and Howard. And I had a nice little green sleigh. I think I still have it.
Down the basement.
That had just newly painted. It was brand new to me. But I took that and we went over to Aunt Jenny's, and I guess I took some other things too. But I sat on the sleigh and got green paint all over my underpants. So I guess it was not as new as I thought it was. It had been repainted very shortly before. But I remember that was the year that my grandma died. And I stayed over with Aunt Jenny and Uncle John for a little while, a few days until they come back.
How did you meet her? What did you think the first time you saw her?
Well, let's see. I'd been going to dances in Preston and in Bear Lake and in Malad and in Logan.
I had a girl in every port.
Anyhow, I was down getting a haircut one day, and Darwin Barker says, how'd you like to meet a gal? And I said, oh, I got plenty. He says, no, I got a friend of Rada's that she went to school with that's really a nice gal. I says, sure, I'll go with her. So he lined us up for, well, what happened, every year they had a big party at the canyon and invited friends from everywhere. There'd be 50 or 60 people there. And so he invited me to go up, and he said, we'll line you up with this girl from Niblin. So come the night, I went out with Darwin to meet her, and she was there. Found out later that she had decided she wasn't going to go and just got backed up, and her mother told her she better go anyhow.
My mother said, you've already told Darwin and Reddy you'd go, so you shouldn't disappoint them. You only have to go this once. Just
She
show
thought,
them.
I don't know where she got the idea. She thought I was Dave Farron, I think. He was just a little teeny guy. Anyhow, I was quite pleasantly surprised. And
So
we went
was
up
I.
the canyon. We went up the canyon and had a real good time. Then let's see, that was on
June the 18th.
June the 18th. And then I don't believe I dated her again until about 24th of July. I come out one day and she
Well,
was...
the reason being, my mother and Dad went with Sarah and Elton back east to pick up a new car, and they left about the day or two after we had that first date. And Mother, being the good mother that she was and very protective,
And
She
how
said-
old were you at that time?
I was about 23.
She had a little boy that was 6 months old, so
18 months old.
18, okay.
So anyway, she said, we're going back east and I don't want anything to happen to spoil our trip. So don't you go out with anybody until we get home. So I said, okay. So for 2 weeks while they were gone, I didn't go out with anybody. And so I was a good girl and stayed home. So then when they got back, then I went with them again.
I think it was the 24th of July, I got a date with her for that evening. I'd had a date that morning. And I had another date that evening. She thought I did, so she
I was
kept me
the
busy.
afternoon date.
So anyhow, the next day we went to Saltaire to ride the roller coasters, and that Saltaire was quite a fun spot. We had a good time out there, and then she says, I've got to buy a radio. I've got the money and I need to buy a radio. And I said, oh, I know these guys in town. I'll go with you and we'll get you one on the discount. But don't think we ever got the radio.
We never got the radio, but we went out every noon hour. He'd pick me up from, I worked up at the university. He'd come up every day at noon, pick me up, and we'd go to look for a radio.
I think she finally spent that money on a marriage license.
I did.
How did you propose?
I don't know.
I don't know, are you supposed to propose? Or you just suppose?
And where'd you get married?
Well, we went and talked to her dad and told her we were going to get married. And her dad says, well, golly, you guys don't live very far apart. You haven't known each other very long. Why don't you?
That was the 18th of August. That was about the 8th of August.
Why don't you cool your jets and just get to know each other a little? So we waited 2 weeks. And
1 week.
I came out to pick her up. We decided we'd go to Las Vegas and get married.
You didn't need to have you didn't need to wait you had a marriage license in Utah at that time. You had to wait 3 days after your license. So we could go down there and we could just get a license and get married.
So how many days did it take you to make it?
Nothing slow about us. We left about noon and we stayed in St. George, slept on the
Tabernacle, yeah.
tabernacle lawn, and then got up about 2 o'clock. I
You
couldn't
did.
sleep.
You slept in the car.
Yeah, I slept in the car. I was nervous. And so then we went on to Las Vegas and talked to my cousin's husband. He was the district attorney in Las Vegas, and so we went in his office and talked to him. And he said, don't go down there and get married. He says, go out home. Merle will have the stake president come over and marry you. And so do that. He called Merle, and so she invited us out. We went out to her place. She had a nice time out there, a nice dinner for us, and had her stake president come over and one of her friends to act as the other witness. So we were married there. And then they waited until we went out to the Flamingo
She was a
resort.
member, they were members of the Flamingo
So
Club.
we went out there and swam until about 10 o'clock or so we could go over to the desert.
Oh, we
after
went to
dark.
Hoover Dam for that, honey.
Or to the dam, that's right, we did.
And where did you spend your honeymoon, though?
Where'd we spend our honeymoon? I'll have to show you a picture of that vacant lot.
On our way down to California, then we were going down to Los Angeles from Las Vegas, and we didn't start out until midnight when it would be cooler. So we got to Victorville,
Victorville.
and there was a vacant lot. We were
We were
getting
both
kind
so
of
tired
tired.
we couldn't hardly hold our eyes open, so we got our sleeping bags out of the back.
Laid them on the lawn, and that's where we slept till 6 o'clock in the morning, and then went on down to Los Angeles and got there about 7 or 8 in the morning.
Florence and High really showed us around there. They took us to the Biltmore dancing. They really showed us a good time.
Yeah.
And then they insisted that I buy her a wedding ring. And I said, I haven't got that kind of money, but they kicked out the money, and there's the ring. So after we got home, I had to sell my little honeymoon car to pay for the ring. So we drove the yellow Model T the first year we were married, and she wasn't too proud. She'd ride with me.
Well, what did you do about Grandpa and Grandma with all of this?
What did we do about it? Which?
Well, when you got married and went to Las Vegas and got married, did they
They knew we were going.
Oh,
They knew we were going.
In fact,
oh, that's right, what did you do?
in fact, Grandma wasn't home, so May McBride came over and attended Alan until Grandma came home.
She had a dinner date, so she went with her friend for lunch, and then after she got home, then May, that was all May took care of, a couple of hours. So,
See, on the trip back, was that when we went to the reunion?
yeah, I guess so. We had a snow reunion on our way
At
back.
Liberty Park.
Heavens forbid you miss a snow reunion.
Well, we'd been married already. We'd been married for 3 or 4 days by that time, so we were all ready to go to the reunion. I wanted to kind of show him off. So we went to the reunion and then come on home after that.
Where was your first house?
We lived in the apartment in the west part of the house for 2 years, And
Until
then-
we got the house we
Then
got.
we got the house we're in now.
That's the only place.
And we
lived.
moved that there from Hiram, I don't know, I guess you all knew that. Grandpa gave us a building lot, and we had the foundation put in, and then they moved the house over and put on the foundation. We went there about first part of 1950,
Mhm.
so we'd been married
And
almost
was it there
Yeah.
first, or
Oh,
What about-
51.
when and Ruby's?
1950.
And
Oh,
the
she was
Orison's
40, 50.
houses, when did they come? Were they already there?
Wayne and Ruby, they lived over on the other corner.
Yeah, but was their house there?
Wayne Ruby's?
Yeah.
That was Grandpa Johnson.
And
Yeah,
it was
those were-
there? And what about the one in between Lillian's? Was
Mac
it
and
already
Ju-
there?
Mac and Julie's little house
Was
had
there,
just
but
barely been built. Cliff Rice was a student at the Utah State, and he built that as part of his school project anyhow. And I think Mac and Julie were the first ones to live in it.
well, Rice's never did live in it then. That's right.
And then we had Budge lived there.
Christensen.
Yeah,
Christensen and
Christensen.
Dean Mockley lived
Okay.
there.
What's your favorite holiday and why?
Well, Christmas is always a favorite holiday because we all get together, and that's the important thing in our lives is when our kids all get together. And that's the one thing that I really am so thankful for, is because my kids are all good friends and we can all get together and have a good time. And that's what I've always wanted all my life. When I was growing up, I wanted a family and thought that would be heaven on earth, and it is. Want you to know how much we love you, all of you, and how much we look forward to the times that we get together. What about yours?
What's yours, Bob?
I think Christmas is the best time of the year because, I don't know, it does something to people. It makes them friendly and giving, and there's just an atmosphere surrounding the Christmas holidays that makes it really, really great.
I thought you'd say the 4th of July.
You did? That was my dad's birthday. That was a special holiday.
What do you do on the 4th?
What do we do on the 4th?
We go to the meeting in Hiram.
Drag out the old cars. Yeah, the 4th is fun, but Christmas, there's something special about Christmas.
I want to go back to my birth. Can I do that?
Yes, you may.
My mother and dad were always active in the church and always had a good, strong testimony. And when I was come into that home, I didn't think there was anything else. The church was it. And they had a testimony, and so I had a testimony before I even knew what a testimony was. I knew it was true because they did. And that was enough for me for quite a while until I started going to primary and Sunday school and learned for myself the things that I should do and tried to do them all the time. And a lot of the time, I didn't want to do anything that would displease my mother and father. And then as I got older, I thought, well, there's more to it than that. I don't want to displease the Lord either. But the first years, it was because I done things because I didn't want to disappoint my mother and my father. And my mother told me that I was adopted long before I ever knew what adopted meant. But then as I grew up and found out what adopted meant, she always told me that my mother that gave me birth was not able to take care of me. She was only 16 years old. She couldn't take care of me, and she loved me enough to let me come to them. They couldn't have children, and to let them take care of me because she felt like they could take care of me and give me more than she could. And so I said, what was her name? And she said, when you grow up and get a little older, then I'll tell you. She told me later that she didn't tell me her name because the kids all knew I was adopted, and so they'd say, oh, who's your real mother? Don't you wish you knew who your real mother was? And so it was for their sake that she didn't want me to say anything or to know who my real mother was, that I would talk about it with others. So when I got out of high school and grew up, then she told me what her name was. And that was all I knew about her. But I didn't ever long for her or miss her or anything. I had all I needed except brothers and sisters. But
Didn't people mistaken you for somebody growing up?
No one ever told me as I was growing up. I'm sure that a lot of people knew or figured they knew. They suspected because I looked like others. I looked like the other members of my family. But no one ever come and told me anything about that. But once when I was about in the 8th grade, I said I looked like Joy. And she said, oh, don't be so silly. You don't either. And she was my half-sister. But, of course, I didn't know it then. But then anyway, then when I got older, then she told me her name. But I didn't try to look her up or anything else. I just knew her name. I knew her first name and her maiden name was all I knew. Do you want me to keep
No, you're
going?
fine. No, this is good.
And so one day we'd been on, I was 72 years old, I think, and we'd been on a trip with Jamie Gordon. And when we come home, we'd been gone for 2 weeks, and we had a pile of papers about like that. Bob went to bed, and I thought, I wanted to look at the papers, and I always look in the obituaries.
She slept all the way home anyhow, so.
So I was rested and able to do that. And I was looking in the paper, and all of a sudden I saw this picture, and it had her name, Ethelyn Orban Wheeler. And I thought, that's the name. So I ran upstairs and told Bob. And he said, and it said that she lived in Ogden in a rest home. So he says, well, let's go down to Ogden tomorrow. And so we went down to Ogden the next day, which was a Sunday after church. We went down. And I said, what would I say? I don't even know what I'd say. I don't know whether any of her family, it listed in the paper that she had a daughter and 2 sons and give their names. But I said, what would I say? Maybe they don't even know about me. And so I didn't know what I'd say.
I said, well, we can at least go look at her.
Yeah, and I wanted to go look at her. I wanted to go and look and see what she looked like. And so we went down there and we called this number. And the girl that answered
find the rest
phone
home in the first place.
said she didn't know anything about her. And so we just give up and come home. The daughter, I looked in the Ogden phone book for the daughter's name, and it wasn't in the phone book. And the others didn't live in Ogden, so we come on home. And the next day, we were out planting flowers, and this car drove up, and the lady got out.
Was you there, Becky? Was it Toki?
No, it was Toki. Toki and Bobby.
Yeah, it was
And-
Memorial Day.
And so she come in and she wanted to know if I was Virginia. And I said yes, and she said she wanted to talk to me around the car. She said, were you adopted? And I said yes, and she said, will you come around here and So we went around so she could talk to me in private. And then she said, were you adopted? And I said, yes. And she said, I think I'm your sister. And I said, what's your name? And she told me what her name was. And I said, and we'd been looking for her yesterday. So I knew. I said, you are my sister. And so she was excited. And so she said, it went around and we met her husband was in the car waiting for her. And so we went in the house. And she said, would you like to see your mother? And I said, well, I certainly would. And she said, when? And I said, today. So she said, all right, come down to my house today. So that was on Decoration Day. And that was the day after we had seen her picture and gone down to look for her. When they come up, she didn't know really who she was looking for except Virginia Snow. And so they stopped at the store, and I don't know who was
And
there.
that was the first holiday the store had been open.
That was.
First time that store had ever been opened on a holiday.
And so they stopped, and it was probably one of the Hadfield boys. And they wanted to know where Virginia Snow lived. And I don't know whether he knew that I was Virginia Snow, but he knew that I was Virginia, and so he showed her. So then she drove down to our house, and that's how she found me. And so we went down that afternoon, and there she had my mother there and my two brothers, and they were both there. And Donna, one wife had passed away, but the other was sick and couldn't come. So my two brothers and her husband and my mother were there. When we went in, she was sitting there just inside the door, and she didn't know who I was. And of course, I knew who she was at that time. And she looked at me with who? And Joanne didn't say anything. And so finally, I thought, what am I going to say? And I didn't have time to think much, so I said, I'm your long-lost daughter. And I thought after, my gosh, she could have had a heart attack to that. And died right on the spot. But anyway, after a minute or two when it registered, then she kind of started to cry. And during the course of the evening, and then my brothers both were there, and they wanted to come over, and they hugged me and were glad to see me, and they were crying, and I was crying, and I don't know, were you crying?
I'm afraid so.
But anyway, she said, I had to promise when I signed papers that to relinquish my rights, I had to sign a paper that said I would never try to look you up or to interfere with your life in any way, and I kept my promise. But she said, I always hoped that the day would come when I'd get to meet you again. So, and that was the first meeting that we've had. Then
she was 90 years old then.
she was 90 years old then. And that summer, they had a reunion. And so they invited us, Bob and I, to come down to the reunion. And they had a nice, great big cake like that. Welcome to Bob and Virginia. So we decided that maybe they were including us and accepting us, so we were happy.
And had they known about this? When did they find out about you?
Well,
Sister just found out.
the sister just barely found out a year or two ago. She had had a stroke. She had had a stroke, and when she had this stroke and was sick, her brother, who had heard her husband kind of throw it up to her that she had had a baby out of wedlock, I guess. And so his uncle explained it to him, but he'd never told the others anything. He never mentioned it to any of the others until she had her stroke, and then he told them that they did have another sister somewhere.
Which brother?
The oldest one, Bonnie. And he was the one that come to see us the other day. And he had kept it all that time. And he's just almost 2 years younger than I am.
Well, we were very fortunate to live in the time that we did. Life was a lot simpler back then. I kind of feel sorry for you guys and the great grandkids. It's a pretty tough world to live in. But I'll tell you one thing, that if you remember what our parents have done for us, the trials and tribulations that they went through for the gospel, and to let you know that the gospel is true and that the only true happiness you'll have will be staying close to the church, doing those things that the church affords you to do, accepting your callings, and doing the Lord's work as much as you can. That's the one thing that will bring happiness into your life. I think that we've been the best of pals all our married life, and the church has brought a lot of comfort and happiness into our lives. We've lost 2 of our kids. We thought when we lost the first one that 10% was pretty good, but we had to give 20%. But we're looking to the time when we'll be back together again, and we hope that you're all planning for that time too, that you'll stay close to the church and enjoy the benefits and the blessings that it gives you.
I think the main thing in life is to get a testimony of the truthfulness of the gospel and the thing that our Savior done for us, the atonement. Get a testimony of that, and then it isn't hard to live the gospel. Well, there were 2 things that she said. One thing was they talked about President Hinckley was going to go to South America to dedicate a temple. And so sometimes he'd take her, and she wasn't sure whether she was going to go. So that night before, as they were getting into bed, she said, "Am I going to go with you in the morning?" And he said, like Bob, "Do we have to discuss that tonight?" And then another thing that I'm like Sister Hinckley. I want you to know that I'm like her, because she said, she wrote a letter to her daughters, and she said, "I've started a new project. I'm reading 1 chapter out of each of the Gospels, 1 chapter a day. And I started that 5 days ago, and I'm only 3 days behind."
I reminded Virginia of when we were leaving the Nibley Church with Grandpa Snow behind Grandma's casket. We're just going out the door, and he didn't have his suspenders on. His trousers come clear down to his knee. She was pulling on one side, and I was pulling on the other side, and all 3 of us are laughing so hard that we could hardly go out the door.
That was one thing about my dad. He always had a sense of humor, and he kept it till the day he died. And he could always laugh at himself and laugh at things. He just was pleasant to have around. And I thank all of you for the help that you give us when we took him and Mother into our home. We could never have done it without all of our family, and especially Bob. He was such a good help, and we were able to keep them at home, and that's the greatest blessing, to think that we were able to keep them at home until they passed away.
But we were kind of like the Hinkleys. They said they started out with nothing. That's the way we did. We started out with nothing, and we were like them. We still got most of it left.
Well, thanks. This has been great. I don't know what this will be like.
Well, I'll tell you, Virginia's favorite joke was about the couple that was in their home, and the knock come at the door, and this fellow come in they hadn't seen for a long time. It was one of their friends, a real good friend. And they got to talking, and they said to him, "How you doing? I haven't seen you for a long time." He says, "Well, I'm doing pretty good." He says, "And I'm getting a little older." He says, "You know, I'm getting so I can't remember things." And the guy says, "Gosh, you ought to go to the doctor. Me and my wife are going to. He's a memory expert. We've been going to him, and he is really great. He sure helped us." He said, "Well, golly, I think I will. What's his name?" He says, "Well, let's see now. It's a flower, has a long stem with thorns on it, Rose? Yeah, Rose. Hey, Rose, what's our doctor's name?